This one incident has to be the one thing that affected my life more than any other incident. This has to be the main reason that I have been married 6 times and have remained friendless most of my life. I attribute this to my not having any trust or confidence whatsoever in my fellow man. Ever since this day that this happened, I've not been able to hug or get close to anyone, including my own children. For many years, I attributed these feelings to the physical, emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse that we young children suffered at the hands of our caretakers while living at the Children's Home Society Orphanage in Jacksonville, Florida. The name of this story is The Horrors of the White House. I was 12 or 13 years old, living at the Florida School for Boys Reformatory at Marianna. When they called me to the head office, they told me that I would soon visit the White House. That was a torture room for boys who broke one of the many rules or tried to escape. I was sent to the reform school for running away from the Children's Home Society Orphanage in Jacksonville. I had been what I call incarcerated there for 10 years for the crime of having no parents to care for me. When I heard they were taking me to the White House, an extreme fear came over me. I almost passed out, and I was trembling so badly that my legs collapsed under me. I fell to the floor and I just lay there. One of the men told me to get my sorry butt up and sit down on the hard wooden bench outside the office. I waited there for 2 men who would come to take me to the White House. I knew their routine well, as I'd heard about it from many of the other boys who had been taken there. Other than the time I learned I had cancer and would die within 6 months, I have never known more fear than when I was told I was being taken to this terrible, terrible place. After a wait of about 30 minutes, these 2 men came to get me. They grabbed me by the arms and they lifted me off the bench. There were several other boys in the office with me, so I tried to act as though I was not scared, but they knew. They knew well. The 2 men walked me across the grass circle which divided the offices from the White House. We stopped at another office, and a man with one arm walked out. He took the place of one of the men holding me. We continued walking around the mess hall. As we rounded the building, I could see it right in front of me. There it was, the White House. My mind was going crazy with fear. My thoughts seemed to be swimming in a circle like a cat that had been thrown into a cold river. I was so scared I could not even think straight. Words were coming out of my mouth before I could even think of what I was attempting to say. I was trying to decide if I should run or hide or maybe even kill myself. Anything was better than what was going to happen to me in there. When we reached the door, one of the men took out his keys and stuck it in the lock. I looked back over my shoulder and I saw about 50 boys. They stared in dead silence. As the door opened, an ungodly odor filled my nose and I could hardly breathe. I remember trying to step up through the doorway, but the odor was so overwhelming that I fell into the short hallway inside. One of the men reached up and turned on a large fan, which muffled the screams of the boys when they were being beaten. Then he grabbed me by the back of the shirt and jerked it up around my neck, choking me. One of the buttons fell off my shirt and hit the floor and rolled very slowly around the corner. Almost everything was happening in slow motion. My whole body was just numb, and it was very difficult for me to breathe. I tried to pull the shirt from around my neck, but the man jerked it up once again and then hit me on the top of the head with his knuckles. I hit the floor and bloodied my nose from the impact. At that point, I was not walking at all. My legs wouldn't even work. The 2 men picked me up and they carried me into a small room. It had nothing in it except a small army bunk bed and a pillow. They put me down on the floor and ordered me to lie on the bed facing the wall. Crying, I pulled myself up on the edge of the bed and I wiped the blood from my nose onto my shirt sleeve. When I looked at the men's faces, they were plain cold and hard. They had no expression whatsoever. I did what they told me to do. One of the men said to move my hands to the top bunk bed and grab the bar at the headboard. I did so as quickly as I could. Not one sound could be heard other than that loud fan. I felt one of the men reach under the pillow and slowly pull out something. I turned over quickly and looked at one of the men who was standing near me. He had a large leather strap in his hand. "Turn your goddamn head back toward the wall, you little bastard!" he yelled. I knew what was going to happen, and I knew it was going to be very bad. I had been told what to expect by some of the other boys who were taken to the White House. I never heard from some of them ever again after they went there. I also heard this giant leather strap was made of 2 pieces of leather with a piece of sheet metal sewn in between the 2 halves. Again, everything was silent. I remember tightening my buttocks as tight as I could. Then I waited and I waited and I waited. I remember someone taking a breath, then a footstep. I turned over very quickly and looked at the man with the leather strap, and there was this ungodly look on his face, and I knew that he was going to beat me to death. I will never forget that look for as long as I live. I tried to jump off the bed, but I was knocked backwards when the leather strap hit me on the side of the face. Blood went everywhere. There was blood squirting on the bed, on the walls, everywhere. Oh God, oh God, oh God. I knew I was about to die, and there was no one who could save me. Oh God, oh gosh. The men grabbed me and they held me to the floor. I was yelling to God to save me, begging for someone, anyone to help me. There was blood all over everything. It was everywhere. Please forgive me, please forgive me, please forgive me. I repeated at the top of my voice, please forgive me, dear God, please help me. But it didn't do any good. God didn't hear me that day. Maybe he was smart enough to never enter the White House even to save a child. After about 5 minutes of begging, pleading, and crying, they told me to get back on the bed and grab the top rail again. They warned me that if I tried to get off the bed, the whole thing would repeat from the beginning. I slowly pulled myself up off the floor and I got back onto the bed again. I grabbed the top rail and I waited. Everything became quiet except for the 2 men breathing really hard. Once again, I tightened my buttocks and I waited. Then all of a sudden it happened. I thought my head would explode. The thing came down on me over and over, and I screamed and I yelled as much as I could, but it didn't do no good. He kept beating me over and over. However, I didn't let go of that bed rail. Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! Yeah. Then there was nothing. The next thing I remember, I was sitting on another wooden bench in the one-armed man's office. I remember wiping the slobber and blood from my mouth. My body felt like it was on fire. I stood and found that I could hardly stand. God, that hurt bad. I will never forget that for the day until the day I die. One of the men in the office yelled at me to sit down. I told him that I had to go to the bathroom really bad. He pointed to the doorway and said it was the bathroom, and he told me to make it quick. I'm going to tell somebody about this here stuff when I get out of here one day, I told the man. Saying things like that around here is a good way to wake up dead tomorrow morning, sonny boy, stated the man as he squinted his eyes, gritted his teeth, and pointed his finger at me. I slowly walked into the bathroom and I closed the door. I looked in the mirror. There was dried blood all over my back and blue face, my hair, and in my mouth. I took my torn shirt off, which was hanging in my waistband of my pants, and then I turned around and I looked at myself in the mirror. My back was black and blue and also bloody. I almost panicked out of my mind when I saw my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a monster. I couldn't even tell who I was anymore. I started to cry, but I covered my mouth with both hands so no other boys would hear me. I loosened my belt buckle to get my pants down. It was very painful, but the worst was yet to come. Once they were down, I noticed that my legs were bloody and my skin was totally black in color. I stood over the toilet and tried to urinate, but it wouldn't come out. I decided to take down my underwear and sit on the toilet until I could go, but the underwear wouldn't come off. They were stuck to my rear end and legs. The cotton material had been beaten into the skin of my buttocks and was dried with blood. I pulled my pants back up and washed my face, mainly because I didn't want the other boys to see that I'd been crying. I was so scared that I was shaking all over, and I just couldn't quit shaking. Finally, I walked back into the outer office, and I saw Mr. Sealander, my cottage house parent, standing by the doorway. He took me back to my cottage, then he called the office to complain about what had happened to me. Then he took me to the hospital where the old nurse, Miss Womack, soaked me in Epsom salts, and Dr. Wexler sutured up my wounds to my buttocks. With tweezers, she pulled out the remaining pieces of underwear from my skin. Then she petted that big, ugly cat of hers, and she sent me away. Why was this done to me? I never knew until years later why I was beaten like that. They did it because I said the word shit when I slipped on the diving board of the pool. I don't ever remember saying that kind of word. I never was a boy who cursed. I will never forget for as long as I live that vicious beating done to me without even knowing why. I will never forget the monster that I saw in the mirror that day. It was terrible. I will never forget what adults are capable of doing to a child. I will never forget that the state of Florida was behind what happened to me and to many, many other boys just for running away from an abusive orphanage. I don't hold any grudges against those men. If Mr. Hatton had not beat me, another man would have done the job. Those were the rules. To them, it was just a job they were paid to do. However, I've always wondered if Mr. Hatton was ever troubled the least little bit by that beating. I have always wondered if Mr. Robert Curry, the psychologist, got a thrill out of putting a 12 or 13-year-old boy in his place like that. I thank you for carrying Mr. Sealander wherever you are. I want to thank you for your kindness and understanding. Because of that one kind deed, I have learned to somewhat trust, respect, and take the word of my fellow man at age 62. Thank you for being kind to me. Thank you for making me feel that I had a worth to somebody. I will always remember, respect, and love you for that kindness. Roger. That beating had to be one of the most horrible experiences of my life. Far worse than the physical, emotional, verbal, and sexual abuse that I suffered at the Children's Home Society in Jacksonville, Florida. There is very little doubt in my mind that this beating was the direct cause of my having been married 6 times. Divorce is caused because of my inability to love and trust others. An entire lifetime of having no true friends because I could not allow myself to ever trust anyone. I've been asked many times, considering all the abuses that I took as a child, why I did not become an alcoholic, a drug addict, or commit suicide like some of the other children who came from that same orphanage. I know the reason very well. It was because I had to stay fully alert at all times in order to protect myself from the horrors of the White House.